Hello everyone, we are at JAX London 2018, day 2, and I am here with Bernd Ruecker.
Very good.
So you're going to have a talk in a few minutes, and you're going to talk about the most common pitfalls in microservice integration. So could you give us an overview of what we should expect from your talk?
Yeah, I'm actually talking about 3 common pitfalls. I'm not convinced that are the most common ones. That's the common ones in the world I normally live in. And that's basically about, what we're doing with microservices and other architectures, we're cutting down, slicing down the architecture into smaller pieces. Mm-hmm. And then these smaller pieces have to communicate in order to do something like useful on the overall level. And there are these pitfalls, like communication between the microservices is quite interesting. So we saw in a survey we recently run that like 80% of the people still using REST, for example, for the communication, like synchronous communication. And there you have a lot of pitfalls, like the peer might not be available, you might have to retry, you might have to do that for a longer time, and this is where I'm looking into in the talk later on, and also proposing solutions like very obvious ones like circuit breakers, like really saving other services from going down to if another service is down, but also like stateful things like what I call long-running interactions. So if the service is not available, retry it for a longer time, for minutes or hours, and so on and so forth. And I'm also looking like the second pitfall is around asynchronous communication. If you're doing like messaging or eventing, then you have other challenges, but comparable, because you probably have to wait for something for a longer time that's stateful, so you have to take care about. And the third pitfall, that's actually my favorite one. It's about consistency in these kind of systems. So I have an own talk also giving that on other occasions called Lost in Transaction. So it's about how can I ensure that I do like 2 things or 3 things in a row, and I want to have that in an all or nothing semantic. It happens or it doesn't, which I, like in old architecture, I did that by transactions. And I don't have them in distributed systems. So it's really hard to achieve this kind of consistency. And that's what I'm talking about today as well. That's actually a very interesting problem.
Great, I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh yeah, me too.
So in your opinion, what are the top drivers for adopting microservice architecture? What do you think are the benefits, the business benefits?
Yeah, so I'm normally using one metaphor for describing microservices, which is a so-called 3-legged race. Mm-hmm. So that's where you bind together 2 people by their feet and then they run. It's kind of a game. Okay. But what I can see in that metaphor, and that's what we're doing in the companies right now, we're binding together a lot of teams and they have to do a joint release. Or in order to work properly, they have to communicate a lot in order to get something in production. And that's a 3-legged race. And it's very obvious that it slows you down. Everybody runs a bit slower and the risk of falling down is much higher. And that's what we try with microservices. We unbind that. We let the teams run on its own. We want to have a lot of autonomy in the teams, and that makes it possible to move faster. And that's was also backed by the survey, for example, we did. A lot of people responded they want to have faster time to market for new products. They want to be more agile because they see the urge of the digital transformation, so they have to respond faster to changes. They wanted to increase basically the autonomy of the teams, the resilience if something goes wrong. And these are basically the reasons why they are moving there.
Yes, great. And from my understanding is if something breaks, it's not just one big solid cube that if it breaks you just have to throw away. Yeah. You can just repair and look into the smaller parts. Definitely. Individually. Definitely. Great. So while I was reading the Outlook for Microservice Architecture report, a report that was supported by Camunda, some of the results really caught my eye. Okay. One of them being that 41% of the respondents reported that they don't have a uniform approach in handling errors at microservice boundaries. Yeah. So what's your take on that? Do you think that this is something that enterprises should really look into fixing, improving in the future?
Definitely. I mean, that's what the 3 pitfalls talk is basically about. I mean, the complexity moves from one service is now easy to do, into the communication between them. And that means errors with the boundaries and the communication. Because responsibility is very often not clear. And another figure is quite interesting, is even more often than this is the lack of visibility of end-to-end processes. Like, I mean, if you do something like whatever, you place an order somewhere, then a lot of microservices have to do something in a row in order to get that doing. And you lose that visibility. You don't see how that's going on. And if there's an error between 2 services, you probably even don't recognize that. And you probably even don't recognize that the overall workflow is not fulfilled at all. And these are huge challenges. And people, they start to see that. But they simply start. A lot of companies I saw are not really aware of the order of magnitude of the problem. So that's quite a huge thing, yeah.
That's very, very interesting. I'm really looking forward to see your proposed solutions. So I want to go back a bit and look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
And I see that the microservices universe seems to be expanding steadily with new tools being released fairly often. And most recently we had the Helidon project, the open source Oracle project that is believed to be a great tool for Java developers to build microservices. So what do you think about the whole status? Do we have sufficient tools to cover the developers' needs? Do you maybe have any suggestion?
I think that's a quite hard question, actually, because it's really a moving target at the moment. So I see a lot of great initiatives coming up all the time, popping up. But also, on the other hand, I see as the adoption rises, I see new problems, new challenges coming up all the time. So I think that will be like a constant battle going on. And yeah, to an extent, frameworks are important to really implement the stuff. And I'm personally a huge fan of seeing code in order to understand an idea. So I'm also a huge fan of having working software. But on the other hand, it's still a challenge of how do I slice the system? How do I lay out the microservice? How do I have the responsibility distributed throughout the organization? And I think that's still the bigger challenge to learn than the concrete frameworks. And if I look at the frameworks side of things, for example, I also see an upcoming battle between what we see with the microservices nowadays and probably all that Kubernetes, whatever related things. And on the other hand, like the serverless world, the function as a service, the complete new thing going on. That's also quite an interesting one.
It's the new trendy thing taking over.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah.
But but to comment on the adoption rate, probably I still see when I know I'm back from conference, I'm going into like the typical customer. They're still at the very beginning of microservices, very beginning. A lot of them, they're making their first steps. So I think there's still like for startups, they are doing microservices all over the place. But if you go to the traditional companies, they have a long way to go.
So you partially answered my last question, because I wanted to ask, where do you think we are from an evolutionary standpoint? So, what do you see for the future from now on?
No, I think we already have quite some practices in microservices. So we are not at the very beginning, but the adoption is quite scattered. So in some parts of the industry, it's pretty good adopted, and some parts are really lacking behind at the moment. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we still have to learn so much. I mean, we're starting to do highly distributed systems for everything, and that's quite a huge complexity. And we are not really understanding every bits and pieces of that. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we're starting new journeys like serverless, which I personally believe will be a huge thing. Probably it still needs a couple of years to really to get traction, to get the tools evolving, because lack of tooling is a huge pain in the serverless world. But I think this will be solved, and then this couple of years down the road, I see that as a huge trend.
Great. That was a great talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I'm really looking forward to your session.
Thank you.